The morning sun struck the gravel training yard like molten gold, glinting off the sweat on the foreheads of a dozen trainees as they ran drills, laughed loudly, and flexed their confidence. The air smelled of freshly rained mud and gasoline from nearby training vehicles. It was a typical day at Fort Minden, rigorous, punishing, and relentless. Everyone thought they had this army life figured out. Everyone except her. She appeared at the edge of the yard like a shadow stepping into sunlight, her silhouette quiet but impossibly composed. Mid-30s, standard-issue training gear, nothing distinctive, nothing flashy, just a calm presence that seemed to demand the attention of anyone within 10 feet, even without trying. Her hair was pulled back in a tight braid that swung with every step, and her boots, though dusty, carried an unspoken authority. The group of trainees immediately noticed her. Whispers buzzed through the ranks like electric current. "Newbie," muttered one, a wiry kid with a nervous energy that made him jitter constantly. "Looks soft," another said, smirking. "That's going to slow us down," remarked Cade Mercer, the tallest, most arrogant trainee, whose smirk suggested he ran the yard without rank, relying on confidence and muscle. She didn't respond. She didn't even glance at them. Instead, she moved with deliberate precision toward the starting line for the morning run. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Just a rhythm, a quiet determination that seemed to draw the sun's light in her direction. The whistle blew, shattering the quiet with its shrill authority. Trainees lunged forward, pumping arms and stomping boots against the gravel. Cade, sizing her up with predatory precision, moved alongside her, a cruel grin playing on his lips. He had a plan. A quick step here, a slight nudge there, one poorly timed slip from her, and she'd tumble into mud and gravel. Embarrassment would follow, and Cade would prove his dominance. But she didn't fall. At the last fraction of a second, she shifted her weight with almost imperceptible grace, sidestepping his trap. Cade stumbled instead, his balance betraying him as his foot slid on the gravel. The smirk vanished, replaced by confusion, then red-faced fury. He caught himself just before face-planting, glancing at her in disbelief. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her pace never faltered, her breathing steady, her stride natural and effortless, almost predatory in its efficiency. By the end of the run, she had crossed the line first. The other trainees, some panting, some frozen mid-step, stared at her. Whispers and murmurs filled the air, tinged with awe and apprehension. Cade's jaw tightened. He felt a surge of something unfamiliar, the sting of being outclassed, outmatched, and by someone who shouldn't have been able to do it at all. After the run, the trainees collapsed against walls, benches, and each other, drinking water, rubbing sore muscles, and laughing nervously. Cade, however, stalked off toward the administrative office. He wasn't used to losing. He wasn't used to being embarrassed. And he certainly wasn't used to being embarrassed by someone without rank, without a record, without anything. Inside the office, he leaned over the clerk's desk, a scowl on his face. "Name?" asked the clerk, typing quickly. Cade gave it, fully expecting her records to pop up, but the screen blinked, and blinked again. "That can't be right," the clerk murmured. "What?" Cade leaned in closer. "There's no training record, no background. She's not a transfer. She's not a recruit. She's not listed in medical, admin, or personnel." The clerk squinted at the screen, disbelief creeping into her voice. "It's like she doesn't exist." Cade froze. "Everyone has a file." "Not her," the clerk said quietly. "She's invisible." Cade's heart skipped a beat. Something about the way she'd moved earlier, about the precision, the power, the control, suddenly made sense and scared him. He left the office without another word, walking the gravel yard with a new tension twisting in his chest. Outside, the woman passed him in the hallway, calm, unhurried, eyes sharp, scanning, alert. For a split second, Cade caught the briefest flicker in her gaze, a mixture of awareness and wariness. It was subtle but unmistakable. He didn't know why, but he felt a shiver crawl down his spine. He followed her across the yard. "You think you're special," he called out, trying to sound intimidating. She stopped, finally looking at him. Her expression was unreadable. calm, controlled. Even when she spoke, her voice was soft but carried a weight Cade couldn't place. "No," she said quietly, "I'm just here to train." Her words didn't fit what he'd seen. Her eyes told a different story: experience, discipline, pain, loss, secrets. Cade felt a strange combination of fear and curiosity. He wanted to know, needed to know. That night, he couldn't sleep. He scrolled through contacts on his phone until he found someone he hoped could give him answers. A retired sergeant who had seen almost everything in the army and lived to tell the tale. When he finally got the old man on the phone, his voice trembled slightly. "Son, you don't want to mess with her," the man warned. Cade's fingers tightened on the phone. "Why not?" "Because," the man said slowly, pausing as if weighing each word, "she led combat operations longer than you've even been shaving. 12 years. Real missions. You don't touch her." Cade's stomach dropped. He felt the full weight of what he didn't know. 12 years of combat. 12 years of precision, training, and survival. And here she was, quiet, unassuming, a rookie among a gaggle of overconfident kids. He hung up, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she moved, the way she carried herself, the way she had anticipated his move on the run. He knew instinctively that she wasn't just any soldier. She was something else, something he had never encountered. He didn't sleep that night. And as dawn crept over Fort Minden, the sound of boots clattering on gravel, the smell of gunpowder and wet dirt, and the low murmur of recruits warming up, Cade knew that nothing would ever be the same. Because she wasn't just another trainee. She was a storm disguised as a shadow. And Cade Mercer, for the first time in his life, felt powerless. Little did he know, what he thought was just a rookie was a soldier whose past would reach into the present and turn everything he knew about the Army and himself upside down. Cade Mercer spent the rest of the day haunted by her presence. Every time he thought about her, he remembered the way she moved, the effortless control, the quiet authority that had no place in a training yard full of brash recruits. By evening, curiosity had transformed into obsession. He had to know who she was. He returned to the administrative office under the pretense of checking his own records. The fluorescent lights hummed above, flickering occasionally, casting long shadows across stacks of folders and buzzing monitors. He approached the clerk, an older woman with a face lined by decades of bureaucracy. "I need to check something," he said, trying to sound casual. "New trainee. Names, he paused, testing his memory. "Lieutenant, well, no, just civilian Sarah Quinn." The clerk typed slowly, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Her eyes squinted at the screen. "Wait, that can't be right," she said, her voice soft, almost disbelieving. "What do you mean?" Cade leaned closer. "There's no record. Nothing at all. She's not listed in any training database, no medical files, nothing from personnel. It's as if she doesn't exist." Cade's stomach sank. "Everyone has a file, everyone." "Not her," the clerk said, shaking her head. "She's an anomaly. I don't understand it. She doesn't appear anywhere." Cade's mind raced. He felt the adrenaline shift to something colder, heavier, something dangerous. He had expected a mistake, a clerical error, maybe a delayed transfer, but no file in the Army. That was impossible. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tight. She nodded. "I've searched every database I can think of. It's like she walked into existence just now, and before that, nothing." Cade's pulse quickened. He left the office, his footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. Outside, the evening air was sharp, biting at his skin as if it too sensed the tension in him. He scanned the training yard. She was there, stretching quietly, alone, watching the sun dip behind the distant hills. Her hair caught the fading light, a golden halo around her composed, silent figure. Cade felt an urge he had never felt before: fear. Not just respect, not just surprise, but a deep, primal unease. There was something about her, something he couldn't define, that felt dangerous. Later in the barracks, Cade couldn't stop thinking. He scrolled through contacts on his phone until he found someone who could answer questions most soldiers would never dare to ask. Retired Sergeant Major Nathan Hawk Lawson. Hawk had been through more conflicts than Cade could count, seen soldiers rise and fall, and survived Black Ops missions that were never supposed to exist. When Hawk answered, Cade's voice was taut with urgency. "Sir, I need to know about a new trainee, named Sarah Quinn." Hawk's silence stretched. Then finally he said, "Son, you don't want to mess with her." Cade felt his chest tighten. "Why not? She's just training, isn't she?" Hawk's voice dropped. "Training? That's not what you saw, that's not what she is. She's been in combat for 12 years, real missions, classified ops, stuff that would make your hair stand on end. You don't touch her, you don't confront her, you keep your distance." Cade blinked. 12 years. Combat operations. 12 years of blood, bullets, and decisions that could make or break lives. The woman who had walked through the training yard like any ordinary trainee was, in reality, a weapon, and she had survived everything thrown at her. "Sir, I don't understand," Cade said, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. Hawk's sigh was heavy, weighted with experience. "She's seen things you can't imagine, son. Missions nobody survives unscarred. And yet here she is, walking into your little training program like she belongs. Respect her, learn from her, and for God's sake, don't test her patience." The line went dead before Cade could ask more. That night he couldn't sleep. Every creak of the barracks, every shadow outside the window seemed amplified. He remembered her movements on the gravel yard, how she had sidestepped his attempt to trip her, how her eyes scanned constantly, like she was reading threats in the air that nobody else could see. Cade finally understood. This wasn't a rookie who had wandered in by mistake. This was a soldier whose very presence shifted the energy of the room, the yard, the base. Every step she took was precise, measured, and intentional. The next morning the whispers started. Trainees who had once laughed at her now paused mid-sentence, glanced at each other, and lowered their voices. "She's not a rookie," one muttered. "No way, she's just starting." "She's done real missions," another added, voice trembling. Cade kept his distance, trying to process what Hawk had told him. He watched her as she moved through the drills, a calm storm in motion. She corrected mistakes with a quiet precision, avoided confrontation but never backed down, and carried herself in a way that radiated authority. Even when she didn't speak, people listened. During the morning obstacle course, her skills became impossible to ignore. One of the newer recruits misjudged a rope climb and fell hard, twisting his ankle. Screams echoed across the yard. While everyone froze, she didn't hesitate. She sprinted to the recruit, lifted him with startling strength onto her shoulder, and carried him to safety, her movements fluid, controlled, almost inhuman in their grace. The medics took over and she walked away, mud splattered across her gear, expression tight and unreadable. Cade couldn't stop staring. She had saved the recruit with the ease of someone who had carried far heavier burdens under far more dangerous circumstances. He had to know more. He needed to know. Later that day, Cade found a quiet corner near the firing range and asked her directly. "Why are you even here?" he said, voice low. She didn't look at him. Her eyes focused on some distant point, as if she were remembering something painful. "To reset," she said quietly. "Reset, what does that mean?" Her jaw tightened. A flash of pain crossed her features, gone in an instant. "A lot can go wrong after 12 years, she murmured. Cade felt a chill. 12 years. Not training, not office duty, combat operations. He had no idea what that entailed, but he knew instinctively it was more than he could handle. He wanted to ask more, to push, to dig into her story. But before he could speak, she walked away, leaving Cade alone with a gnawing sense of unease. He realized that whatever she had done, wherever she had been, it had made her untouchable, and untouchable meant unpredictable. By the end of the day, Cade's curiosity had transformed into something sharper, suspicion. He knew he couldn't confront her again, not without understanding what she was capable of, and that knowledge terrified him. As the sun set over Fort Minden, casting long shadows across the gravel and the training equipment, Cade's thoughts returned again and again to one inescapable truth. This woman wasn't who she appeared to be. She was something else entirely, and Cade Mercer was about to find out whether he was ready or not. And in the stillness of the evening, as she vanished into the shadows of the barracks, Cade felt it clearly. This story was just beginning. The morning air at Fort Minden was thick with tension. Birds chirped nervously in the distance, and the gravel of the training yard shimmered with dew. The other trainees avoided looking at her, not because they were afraid, not entirely, but because her presence was magnetic, unsettling, impossible to ignore. Every step she took carried authority. Every glance hinted at experience far beyond their collective understanding. Cade Mercer trailed her at a distance, keeping one eye on the ground, one on her movements. He wasn't just curious anymore, he was determined. He needed to understand how someone with no apparent record, no visible credentials, and no reputation could command attention and outperform nearly everyone in the yard without breaking a sweat. The day began with standard drills, obstacle courses, timed sprints, and hand-to-hand combat exercises. Most trainees floundered, fumbling with ropes or stumbling through tires. She moved effortlessly through each station, correcting her own mistakes before anyone else could notice them, her calm exterior giving nothing away. Cade watched, fascinated and frustrated, as she methodically handled every challenge with a precision that was almost surgical. Then came the accident. During the rope climbing station, one of the newer recruits, a lanky, awkward kid named Daniels, lost his grip halfway up. He slipped, yelped, and crashed into the mud below, his ankle twisting at an unnatural angle. The sound made everyone flinch. Some trainees gasped, others froze. Cade felt a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment where chaos tested character. Everyone except her reacted the same way. She moved. Her body launched forward with a fluid, practiced grace, covering the distance in a few powerful strides. She bent, cradled Daniels in her arms like he weighed nothing, and hoisted him onto her shoulder with startling strength. Her boots sank into the mud, her uniform splattered, but she didn't falter. Within seconds, she carried him to the medical tent and lowered him gently, speaking softly, calmly, reassuringly as the medics took over. Cade's jaw dropped. He had expected someone to try, maybe stumble, but not to move like that. Her efficiency was beyond extraordinary. It was terrifying. After the tent doors closed, she wiped mud from her sleeve and walked back to the yard. Cade caught up with her, chest heaving from a combination of exertion and awe. "Why didn't you fall during the run yesterday?" he asked, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. She paused mid-step, her gaze drifting toward the horizon as though considering whether to answer. Then she spoke, voice quiet but firm, "Because I've seen worse than a stumble on gravel." Cade froze. Worse than a stumble. She had seen worse. And in that single, loaded statement, she revealed the faintest trace of the truth he'd only begun to suspect. Her life had been forged in circumstances far more severe than this controlled environment. For a moment, he imagined her in a distant desert, under fire, making decisions that could determine life or death. The thought made his chest tighten. What are you?" he asked, almost whispering. She didn't answer. She simply continued walking, her gaze scanning the yard, alert as if listening for threats no one else could hear. Her calmness was a shield. Her silence was a wall. Cade realized that whatever history she carried, it was heavy, dangerous, personal. Training continued, but the day felt different. Whispers followed her. Trainees who had been brash and joking just hours ago now spoke in hushed tones. "She's not a rookie. She's done real missions. Cade, you pissed off the wrong person." Cade's stomach knotted. The realization hit him like a punch. This was bigger than training, bigger than proving himself. He was staring at someone who had survived events he couldn't even imagine, and yet here she was, blending into civilian ranks. That afternoon, during hand-to-hand combat drills, Cade was paired with another recruit. He stumbled, missed a step, and ended up on the mat, chest pressed against cold rubber flooring. Across the room, she watched silently, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, the instructor called for a partner swap. Cade was to face her. Every trainee stopped to watch. Cade felt a mixture of pride and dread. He had seen her move. He had seen her strength. He also knew the stories, whispered, unconfirmed tales of her efficiency, her reputation, her past. He approached her cautiously. The air between them was electric, charged with tension. They circled each other. Cade attacked, striking left, then right, but she blocked every move with minimal effort. Her footwork was precise, her counterattacks deliberate but restrained. She didn't overpower him, not yet. She held back, almost as if she were measuring his skill, his intent, his potential. Cade thought he saw a flicker of hesitation in her movements. A half-second lapse, a subtle crack in the armor she so meticulously maintained. "What's wrong?" he asked, baiting her. Her eyes flicked up briefly, a shadow of pain passing through them, gone before he could interpret it. She countered with a sweep that nearly knocked him off his feet. Cade stumbled back, heart racing, mind spinning. She wasn't just skilled, she was calculating. Every movement told a story, every glance revealed experience he could only guess at. After several minutes, the instructor blew the whistle. They separated. Cade was sweating, exhausted, but also exhilarated. He had survived the encounter barely, but he had also glimpsed something far more alarming than skill: vulnerability. He caught her slipping for the first time. Just a subtle hesitation, the briefest pause in her eyes and stance, and it shook him. He realized that even someone as formidable as her had ghosts, pain, memories, things that made even a soldier of legend flinch. Cade felt a strange mix of fear and empathy. He wanted to know more, to understand, but he also knew he was treading dangerous ground. That evening, the base's lights dimmed as the trainees filed back to the barracks. Cade watched from a distance as she walked alone, boots crunching over gravel, her figure framed by the fading sunset. He remembered the retired sergeant's warning: "You don't touch her, you don't confront her, you keep your distance." But Cade couldn't. As he approached her, he noticed for the first time how her shoulders sagged slightly, how her hands trembled faintly, how the day's exertion and mental strain weighed visibly on her. She was invincible in appearance, but Cade could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. He swallowed, nervously clearing his throat. "You saved him today," he said, nodding toward the medical tent where Daniels had been treated. "Most people wouldn't even know what to do." She glanced at him briefly, eyes sharp but softened with a trace of weariness. "Some things are hard to watch and impossible to ignore," she said. Her voice carried a weight that made Cade shiver. He wanted to ask about the 12 years he'd heard whispers of, the combat operations, the missions, the battles fought in darkness and secrecy. But before he could, she turned and walked into the barracks, disappearing into the shadows. Cade stood alone in the yard, the chill of the evening creeping into his bones. He realized something. He was witnessing a woman who had survived 12 years of warfare and unimaginable pressure, yet she carried herself in civilian life like she was just another trainee. And yet he could see it. The burden, the tension, the hints of pain that she tried to mask. The realization struck him with a jolt of fear. He was standing on the edge of a storm he could neither control nor predict. She was a weapon. She was a survivor. She was human. But most importantly, Cade knew she had secrets. Secrets that could reach into the present and change everything for everyone around her. As the night air cooled, he made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth. Not because he wanted to challenge her. Not because he wanted glory. But because he had no choice. The moment he saw the first crack in her armor, he realized the world around her was already on the brink of chaos, and Cade Mercer would either understand it or be destroyed by it. And somewhere deep inside, Cade sensed the first flicker of a realization that would haunt him forever. This woman's past was alive. It wasn't gone. It was coming for her, and anyone standing too close would feel the impact. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when the quiet at Fort Minden shattered. Cade Mercer sat on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the woman who had arrived like a shadow in daylight. The way she moved, the way she carried herself, the whispered stories of 12 years of combat, they had consumed his thoughts all day. And yet nothing could have prepared him for what came next. A sudden shrill alarm pierced the evening air. High-pitched, mechanical warning of something that demanded attention immediately. Trainees scrambled to gather their gear, instructors barked orders, and boots thundered across the gravel yard. Cade leapt from his bunk, heart hammering, instincts screaming that this was no routine drill. He ran outside and froze. MPs had surrounded the barracks, their weapons raised, radios crackling urgently. Faces were tense, strained with fear. The trainees clustered nervously behind the perimeter, whispers of intruder and breach floating like smoke in the chilled night air. "What's going on?" Cade demanded. One MP's voice trembled. "We got a report of someone unauthorized on base, armed, dangerous." "Who?" Cade pressed, panic rising. The MP shook his head. "We don't know, but they went straight for her building." Cade's stomach plummeted. Her building. The quiet, composed figure he had been obsessed with all day. The woman who had walked the training yard like a ghost. He sprinted across the yard, boots skidding against gravel, just in time to see her standing at the doorway of her barracks. She was tense, alert, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to strike. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She didn't plead. She simply stood her ground. "Ma'am, please step back," one of the MPs shouted, raising his weapon. Her eyes flicked to him, then back at the perimeter. Calm but piercing, controlled yet unflinching. And then she asked the question that froze Cade in place. What insignia was the intruder wearing? The MPs exchanged confused glances. "None," one replied cautiously. Her face drained of color. Her composure faltered for the briefest moment, just enough for Cade to notice. "That means," she whispered almost to herself, "they weren't here to spy. They were here to finish something." Before anyone could react further, a deafening explosion erupted from the woods beyond the base fence, sending a shockwave that rattled windows and shook the ground beneath their feet. A flare shot into the night sky, illuminating twisted shadows of trees and the distant tree line. Cade's chest tightened, lungs constricting as adrenaline coursed through him. His instincts screamed that this was no ordinary threat, no routine intruder. The calm, confident woman he had watched all day was suddenly alive with alertness, every second loaded with the weight of experience he could barely comprehend. She turned to him, eyes sharp as steel. "Get everyone inside, now." "Wait, how do you—" Cade started, but she grabbed him by the front of his shirt, her grip firm, authoritative, inhumanly precise. "Because this isn't the first time they've chased me," she said, her voice low, deadly, carrying the weight of secrets and nightmares. The MPs tried to regain control, shouting commands over the din of alarms and distant explosions. Trainees panicked, running for the safety of the nearest building. But she moved through the chaos like a shadow, directing people calmly, decisively, without hesitation. Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Barracks 2 inside now. Move, move, move." Cade followed, stunned, watching her coordinate the terrified trainees with a precision that rivaled the most elite commanders. She didn't yell or threaten. She just moved and people obeyed. Once inside the barracks, she secured the doors, turned off lights, and instructed everyone to stay low, away from windows. Cade, breathing heavily, finally found the courage to ask, voice trembling, Who are they?" She crouched near a window, peering into the darkness. "They're ghosts from a life I thought I left behind, people who were supposed to be gone, but they were. They never are." Her words, laced with history and danger, made Cade shiver. He realized for the first time that her calm demeanor, her effortless control, her quiet efficiency, it all stemmed from surviving things most soldiers would never see. The yard, the drills, the training exercises, they were trivial compared to what she had faced. The next explosion, closer this time, shook the building violently. Cade fell to his knees, heart racing. She grabbed his arm, pulling him to the floor. "Cover your head. Stay low, trust me." He obeyed, utterly aware that this woman, whom he had underestimated, challenged, and obsessed over, was someone he couldn't control. Someone who could survive, and someone who could make him question everything he thought he knew about strength, courage, and fear. Through the darkness, Cade could see the fear in some of the trainees' eyes. Not her, not her. She moved among them, checking corners, doors, and windows, ensuring safety with a calm ruthlessness. And yet, even as she controlled the situation, Cade noticed something he hadn't before. The slight tension in her jaw, the tightness around her eyes, the way her hands trembled just slightly when she reached for a weapon. Even the strongest have cracks. And in that moment, Cade understood the terrifying truth. She had carried 12 years of combat, 12 years of decisions, of lives saved and lost, of orders followed and missions failed. And the ghosts of that past had finally caught up with her. A distant shout broke the tense silence. Cade froze. The intruder had crossed the perimeter and was moving toward the barracks, silent but deliberate. The emergency lights flickered as someone moved against the shadows outside, and then the unmistakable sound of boots crunching gravel. She moved instantly, intercepting Cade before he could rise. "Stay down. Do not look up," she ordered, her voice sharp but steady. Cade obeyed, heart hammering as he watched her vanish into the darkness beyond the doorway, armed and ready, a phantom in motion. Minutes stretched into eternity. The faintest sounds, a snapped branch, a shuffled footstep, a whispered curse, made Cade sweat. He tried to stand, tried to peek through a small gap in the doorway, but her voice cut across the dark. "Cade, sit. Do not move." He obeyed, powerless and awed. He had glimpsed her in drills, in combat simulations, in controlled environments. But this was her element. The darkness, the threat, the chaos, it was where she thrived, where her years of experience became visible, and where her cracks became terrifyingly human. Suddenly, a flare of movement outside. A shadow lunged, striking toward the barricade. Gunfire erupted, sharp, deafening, frightening. Cade flinched. The trainees screamed, cowering, but she was everywhere at once, blocking, redirecting, controlling, surviving. Every motion was precise, every choice lethal. Then silence. Her silhouette returned to the doorway. Mud, dirt, and sweat marked her uniform. One trainee had been grazed by a bullet but was alive. Cade exhaled shakily, adrenaline leaving him in waves. She looked at him, eyes dark but controlled. "This isn't over," she said quietly, "and it never will be. They always find me." Cade's mind reeled. 12 years. Ghosts that refused to die. Missions he couldn't imagine, and she had faced them alone until now. What do we do?" he asked, voice trembling. She took a deep breath, composed herself, and exhaled slowly. "Now we survive the night. Then we figure out what comes next." Her words were calm, but Cade could feel the weight behind them. He knew in the core of his being that the storm of her past was not something that could be outrun or avoided. It was here. It was real. And the moment had arrived where Cade Mercer realized with stark clarity. He was no longer dealing with a simple trainee, a rookie who didn't exist in the system. He was dealing with a soldier forged in war, haunted by her own history, and now forced to face it head-on, with everyone around her caught in the crossfire. The night was far from over, and somewhere in the shadows beyond the barracks, the ghosts of her past were watching, waiting. The first light of dawn barely pierced the horizon, painting the gravel and barracks in pale gold. The chaos of the night still lingered in the air, the lingering smoke from distant fires, the acrid scent of spent gunpowder, and the tension etched into every trainee's face. Cade Mercer moved cautiously through the yard, still shaking from adrenaline, still struggling to process what he had witnessed. The woman, Sarah Quinn, sat alone on the steps of the barracks, her posture straight, shoulders tense, hands gripping her knees. She was silent, staring into the distance, lost in thoughts Cade could not begin to understand. The mud on her boots from last night was dry now, the uniform stained and wrinkled, but she didn't seem to notice. She was calm, but beneath that calm Cade could sense an undercurrent of exhaustion, of pain she refused to acknowledge. Cade hesitated. He had questions, dozens of them, but he also had a deep, gnawing sense of caution. Hawk's warning echoed in his mind. You don't touch her, you don't confront her, you keep your distance. But he couldn't, he had to know. Sarah, he said softly, kneeling beside her. She didn't flinch, didn't look at him. Last night, who are you really? She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries the weight of years, of secrets, of guilt. For a long moment she said nothing. Cade watched her jaw tighten, the faint tremor in her hands. She was a woman who had survived hell, and yet something in her eyes told him that the real battles had not ended. Finally she spoke, her voice low but steady. I led combat operations, black flag missions, missions that never made the news, that no family ever hears about, that the government denies even existed. Cade's eyes widened. You what? I commanded teams overseas, she continued, gaze distant. 12 years, planning, executing, surviving. Operations in deserts, jungles, mountains, places you've never been. People died. People I trusted died. Missions went wrong. Her voice cracked slightly. Sometimes because of me. Cade swallowed hard. Every word she spoke made the last 24 hours of training make sense. Her precision, her calm, her strength, her anticipation of threats, but also intensified the unease he felt. 12 years of this life, and she carried it like a shadow, invisible until the night intruder reminded everyone that the past never stays buried. Why are you here? Cade asked, voice barely a whisper. Why come to this training base? She looked at him then, and for the first time, Cade saw vulnerability, flickering like a candle threatened by wind. I needed to reset, she said quietly. I needed to train without the weight of war pressing down, without people depending on me for life or death. I wanted to remember what it's like to be human again, even for a little while. And last night proved, Cade pressed. That the war never ends, she said, jaw tight, eyes narrowing. It follows you. Even when you think you're safe, it finds you. Cade felt a chill creep up his spine. The controlled, precise woman he had watched, the one who had sidestepped his trip, saved a trainee, and handled intruders like a shadow in motion, was carrying ghosts he could barely imagine. And yet she was alive, standing in front of him, human in her exhaustion, vulnerable in her silence. He leaned forward cautiously. I don't understand. Why didn't anyone warn us? Why aren't you famous, or at least recognized? Her eyes flickered with bitterness. Because it's classified. Because no one survives these missions without leaving parts of themselves behind. The government doesn't recognize survivors, they recognize results. And sometimes, they bury the survivors too. Cade felt the room shrink around him, suffocating under the weight of her words. He had trained his whole life to handle physical challenges, mental pressure and fear. But he had never encountered a story like this, one that existed in the shadows of secrecy, war, and unspoken truths. She stood brushing dirt from her sleeves and turned to him fully. Her eyes were sharp, piercing, but beneath them glimmered exhaustion, pain, and a strange sadness Cade hadn't anticipated. Cade, she said softly, almost pleading, I've carried 12 years of ghosts. Every mission, every decision, people died. Sometimes because of my choices, sometimes because of forces I couldn't control. And now, she paused, glancing toward the horizon. Someone wants me to pay. Cade's pulse quickened. Pay who? She shook her head. I don't know, not fully, but whoever they are, they're relentless, and they know me. Her words sank like ice into Cade's chest. He had thought the intruder last night was just another threat, a random danger. Now he understood, this was personal, this was calculated, and she had faced it before alone. He wanted to offer words of comfort, of solidarity, but he didn't know if he had the right. She had survived 12 years of combat, 12 years of decisions that shaped life and death. Cade Mercer had survived base training and a few scrapes. That was nothing in comparison. I want to help," he said finally, voice quiet. She studied him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, her expression softened. "I don't need saving, I never have, but having someone who understands what's at stake helps." Cade swallowed, unsure of what to say. He had no idea what that entailed: understanding, helping, surviving alongside a soldier of legend. He only knew that the woman sitting in front of him had changed everything about the yard, about training, about the very concept of strength. Then almost suddenly her demeanor shifted. The vulnerability melted away, replaced by the cold precision Cade had seen before. She exhaled sharply, shoulders straightening. "But this," she said, gesturing broadly toward the base, the yard, the horizon, "isn't just about me anymore. Last night was a warning. They're coming back, and next time it won't be subtle." Cade's heart pounded. "Next time?" "Yes," she said, voice tight. "Next time it's war again, but this time we're on their ground." A silence fell between them, heavy, suffocating. Cade realized he was standing on the edge of something far larger than he had imagined. The woman he had dismissed as a rookie, underestimated, challenged, and obsessed over was not just a soldier. She was a survivor, a commander, a fighter whose past had returned to demand reckoning. "I need to know," Cade said cautiously, "everything. I need to know who you really are, not just what you've done, but everything. The truth. I need to understand." She looked at him, eyes shadowed, unreadable. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly. "Some truths aren't meant to be spoken lightly," she said. "But you should hear them, because once you do, there's no going back." Cade's stomach tightened. He had sensed it already. Her past was a storm. And now he was about to be swept into it, whether he was ready or not. She began to speak, her voice steady but heavy with history. "I was a captain in special operations. I led missions that required decisions no one else could make. People trusted me with their lives, and sometimes I failed. One mission in particular, Operation Nightglass, went wrong. Entire teams were lost, and the people who survived, they blamed me, or maybe they just needed someone to blame." Cade felt a shiver run down his spine. Nightglass. The whispered name seemed to carry weight, even he could sense the fear it invoked. "I carried that mission for 12 years, she continued. "The memories, the guilt, the faces of those lost, it never leaves you. And now, someone wants me to pay for it. Someone who remembers everything I tried to bury." Cade tried to absorb the weight of her words. He realized fully that this was not just about base training or rivalries among trainees or proving skill. This was about survival, revenge, and history that refused to stay dead. She looked at him, eyes sharp, unwavering. "Now you know the truth, and you must understand, if we don't act, it won't just be me in danger. Everyone around me, everyone in this yard will feel it, and no one will be safe." Cade nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Then we act," he said, voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. "Whatever it takes, together." Her lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Together," she echoed, but the faintest flicker of doubt shadowed her eyes, a hint of the cracks that still haunted her. As the sun rose over Fort Minden, casting long, golden light across the yard, Cade understood fully. He had stepped into a story far larger than training, far larger than himself. He had glimpsed the shadows of a life forged in war, and he now knew that surviving the past was only the beginning. The storm was coming, and Cade Mercer was standing on the edge, watching history collide with the present, and uncertain whether they would all survive the reckoning. The next morning, Fort Minden seemed eerily quiet. The sun rose in pale streaks across the gravel yard, but the usual chatter, laughter, and stomping of boots were muted. Cade Mercer felt the tension deep in his chest. After Sarah's revelations the previous night, the base felt different, heavy, charged, as though it was holding its breath for something inevitable. She appeared at the edge of the yard just as the first whistle blew, walking with her characteristic calm. But today, there was a subtle change in her posture, an intensity Cade had never seen before. Her eyes scanned the yard with vigilance, alert to every movement, every sound, as if expecting the ghosts of her past to emerge at any moment. The instructors called the group together for a surprise test. Cade knew from experience that these tests were usually physical challenges, endurance runs, or obstacle courses. But today, the air was thick with tension. Even the instructors seemed wary, exchanging glances that suggested something beyond normal training. "Today's exercise," barked Sergeant Larkin, "is designed to test leadership, decision-making, and adaptability under extreme pressure. Pair up and move to your designated zones. Follow the protocol or fail. No exceptions." The trainees scrambled, pairing off as instructed. Cade's eyes found Sarah immediately. She nodded at him almost imperceptibly, acknowledging him without words. Cade's pulse quickened. He knew this wouldn't be a normal test. She never was normal. They were assigned to the eastern perimeter, a wooded area beyond the main training yard. The ground was uneven, the terrain slick with dew, and fog hung low in the early morning light. Cade felt the chill settle deep into his bones. "Your mission," Sarah said, voice low but commanding, "is to locate the target, secure the perimeter, and report back. Assume worst-case scenarios. Expect anything." Cade blinked. "Worst case, you mean?" "No assumptions, Cade, just action," she interrupted. Her eyes were steel, her calm hiding a storm beneath. "Move." As they navigated through the woods, Cade realized just how different Sarah was in this environment. Every step was measured, every glance deliberate. She moved like she owned the shadows, reading the terrain, the sounds, the faintest movements. Cade tried to keep up, struggling to match her pace, her awareness, her instinctive control over the situation. Suddenly, a simulated ambush triggered. A hidden instructor emerged from the trees, firing blanks and shouting commands. Most trainees would panic. Cade almost did, but Sarah reacted instantly. She dropped low, pulling Cade behind a fallen log, scanning the area with precision. "They're testing your reactions," she said quietly. "Move on my mark." Cade swallowed, heart hammering. This was no ordinary test. It was a war game designed to push them to their limits. But Sarah treated it like real combat. Her eyes, her posture, her breathing, everything screamed experience, control, and calculation. As they advanced, Sarah suddenly froze, sensing something Cade couldn't. A rustle in the underbrush, faint but deliberate. Her hand snapped up, signaling him to stop. Cade tensed, waiting. A figure emerged, another instructor, part of the exercise, but Sarah treated them like an intruder. "Eyes on the target. Keep low," she whispered. Cade followed her lead, astonished by her ability to make instant judgments with absolute clarity. She moved, crouched, calculated distances, and avoided detection. Cade stumbled to keep up, but she didn't slow. She simply adjusted, reading his movements, guiding him with subtle gestures. Hours passed like this, a relentless series of challenges, traps, and surprises. Sarah led with precision, tested every assumption, and exposed every weakness. Cade felt his mind and body pushed to the absolute edge. He realized that training with Sarah was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was mental, physical, and emotional all at once. Then came the moment no one expected. A controlled detonation simulated an explosion near their position. Cade was thrown to the ground by the shockwave, dazed. His ears rang. In the chaos, he lost sight of Sarah. Panic surged. He scrambled to regain his bearings, heart hammering. And then he heard it, her voice calm, commanding, almost eerily steady. "Cade, follow the smoke, trust your instincts." He looked to where she indicated and saw a plume rising from the debris, a marker. Hesitating for only a moment, Cade sprinted, guided by her voice and instincts. He reached her just as a simulated threat appeared, a masked instructor lunging with a weapon. In a blur of motion, Sarah disarmed the threat with astonishing efficiency. Her movements were precise, decisive, and controlled. Cade barely had time to react. The masked instructor collapsed in the mud, safe but subdued. Cade stared at her, awe and fear mixing in equal measure. "How?" he started, but Sarah cut him off. "Focus," she said sharply. "This isn't about me, it's about the mission. Every decision counts, every second matters." They continued through the course, facing more obstacles, more threats. Cade realized with growing clarity that Sarah's leadership wasn't just about skill, it was about trust, strategy, and adaptability. She anticipated dangers he couldn't see, corrected mistakes before they happened, and pushed him beyond the limits he thought he had. Finally, they reached the last stage, a mock hostage scenario designed to test split-second decision-making. A trainee was captured by instructors posing as hostile forces. Cade froze, panic rising, but Sarah stepped forward. "Calm," she commanded. "Assess plan, execute." In an instant, she directed him, coordinated movements, and neutralized the threat with astonishing efficiency. Cade watched, breathless, as she handled everything with the precision of a seasoned combat leader. It wasn't just strength or skill, it was experience, intuition, and unwavering confidence. When the exercise concluded, the instructors approached, visibly impressed. Cade, panting, mud-streaked, exhausted, looked at Sarah with a mix of admiration and fear. "You passed," one instructor said to her, voice tight with awe. "Exceptional leadership, situational awareness, unreal performance under pressure." Sarah nodded, expression calm, but Cade saw it, the exhaustion, the tension, the ghosts of past missions that never left her. As they walked back to the barracks, Cade broke the silence. "Sarah, why do you do this? Why push everyone so hard?" She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze drifted to the horizon, eyes distant. "Because," she said finally, voice quiet, almost a whisper, "if I don't push, I'll forget what it feels like to survive. And if I don't push others, they'll never realize how fragile life really is." Cade's chest tightened. He realized that her strength, her discipline, her precision, it wasn't about ego or dominance. It was about survival, about ensuring that she and anyone who followed her would live through situations that most would never survive. For the first time, Cade understood the true weight of her past. The 12 years of combat, of missions, of lives depending on her, of failures and triumphs. It had forged a soldier who could survive anything. But it had also left cracks, vulnerabilities she barely allowed anyone to see. And he realized something else. She was testing him too. Not physically, not in skill, but in trust, resilience, and the willingness to follow when the stakes were unimaginable. That night, as the sun set again over Fort Minden, Cade sat on his bunk, mud-caked and exhausted. He replayed the day over and over, trying to absorb everything he had witnessed. Sarah Quinn wasn't just a soldier. She was a force of nature, a storm forged in war. And Cade Mercer knew, with terrifying clarity, that training with her was no longer about passing courses or proving skill. It was about surviving. And surviving with Sarah meant facing not just her past, but the storms it had left behind, storms that were coming, and that would test them both in ways neither could yet imagine. The calm of Fort Minden was gone. The base felt like a powder keg, each shadow and whisper amplifying the tension that had been building for days. Cade Mercer could sense it in the way the wind rattled the windows, in the way the other trainees moved with a quiet, anxious urgency. Every corner of the yard seemed darker, every sound sharper, as if the night itself were holding its breath. Sarah Quinn moved through the base with purposeful precision. Her eyes scanned the perimeter, every instinct on high alert. She had briefed Cade and a few trusted trainees on the threat last night, outlining contingencies, escape routes, and defensive positions. But this morning, she had a heaviness to her steps, a quiet tension Cade hadn't seen before. "They're coming," she muttered under her breath as she checked the communications console. "And they're faster than I expected." Cade's stomach tightened. After the night's intruder and the subsequent training tests, he had thought he understood the danger. But now, with Sarah so focused and tense, he realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't a drill, a test, or even a routine ambush. This was a reckoning. The first sign came in the form of a drone buzzing faintly over the tree line. It was small, silent, and almost invisible against the early morning light. Cade spotted it only because Sarah's hand snapped to the radio, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Perimeter 2, eyes on aerial, all units defensive posture, do not engage unless instructed." The base erupted into controlled chaos. Trainees scrambled for cover, instructors barked orders, and MPs positioned themselves at strategic choke points. Cade ran beside Sarah, who moved with the fluid, precise confidence of someone who had survived far worse than any training exercise. "Who are they?" Cade shouted over the commotion. "People who should have died 12 years ago," she replied without turning. Her eyes were scanning the tree line, calculating, anticipating. "And they've come for me." Cade's heart pounded. He had sensed fragments of her past, glimpsed hints of missions that would have broken ordinary soldiers. But now, hearing her speak it aloud, he realized the danger was immediate, personal, and lethal. From the tree line, movement began, shadowy figures emerging with calculated stealth. Armed, silent, professional. Cade recognized the precision immediately. These weren't ordinary attackers. They were trained, experienced, and deadly. "Take cover," Sarah commanded. Her voice was calm but edged with urgency. "Remember your training, trust your instincts, follow me." The group moved through the base like a shadow, Sarah leading them with the silent authority of someone used to being hunted. Every step was measured, every glance assessing threats before they could materialize. Cade felt his nerves tighten as he followed, realizing that even one misstep could be catastrophic. The first confrontation came quickly. A masked figure attempted to breach the communications center. Cade froze for a fraction of a second, enough for Sarah to act. She intercepted the attacker with lightning speed, disarming him and pushing him to the ground before he could fire. Cade watched, astonished, as she neutralized threats with a precision that made the controlled chaos of training yesterday seem tame. Her movements were economical, efficient, and deadly. Every action a calculated response to danger. "Move," she barked, directing the trainees to safer positions. Cade ran beside her, trying to absorb everything, her tactics, her instincts, her unwavering focus. But then, the sound of gunfire erupted from the far end of the base. Cade saw the flash of muzzle fire, and a trainee went down. Panic surged through the group, but Sarah remained composed. "Suppressing fire, cover the rear," she shouted. Cade followed her lead, firing his rifle as instructed. He realized in a moment of stark clarity that this was no simulation. This was combat, real, lethal, unforgiving combat. The attackers were methodical, precise, and relentless. Cade could see the way Sarah anticipated their moves, using terrain, shadows, and the trainees themselves as both cover and advantage. She was not just fighting, she was orchestrating survival. At one point, Cade was separated from her by a sudden burst of gunfire. His heart raced, panic threatening to overwhelm him. He ducked behind a supply crate, peering out to see her moving through the chaos like a phantom, neutralizing threats, rescuing injured trainees, and never faltering. Then he saw it, the glint of recognition in one attacker's eyes. A memory passed between them, silent but charged with history. Sarah's expression hardened. He realized in that instant that some of these attackers weren't random mercenaries. They knew her. They had been waiting for her. Cade felt a chill run down his spine. He had known her past was dangerous. He had known she had enemies. But seeing the recognition, the personal vendetta in the attacker's movements, made the threat terrifyingly real. One attacker lunged at Cade's position. He froze, panic threatening to consume him. But then Sarah was there, intervening with a swift strike that incapacitated the assailant before he could act. "You okay?" she asked, voice low, eyes scanning for the next threat. Cade nodded shakily. "Yeah, thanks to you." She gave him a sharp glance, not unkind but focused. "Stay alert. This isn't over." The battle continued for what felt like hours. Each attack was met with strategy, each threat countered with precision. Cade watched Sarah push herself, moving faster, thinking deeper, calculating every possibility. He realized that her 12 years of combat were not just skills, they were instincts, embedded so deeply that her reactions were almost preternatural. Then came the moment Cade would never forget. One attacker, faster and smarter than the rest, managed to breach the perimeter near the medical tent. He had a hostage, a young trainee Cade recognized. Cade froze, unsure what to do. Before he could act, Sarah was there. She moved with a speed and decisiveness that seemed impossible. In one fluid motion, she neutralized the attacker and freed the hostage, all without harm. Cade watched, breathless as she checked the trainee, reassured him, and immediately prepared for the next threat. Cade realized then that she wasn't just strong. She wasn't just skilled. She was a commander, a protector, a survivor who carried the weight of her past and turned it into a shield for everyone around her. As the last attackers were subdued, silence fell over the base. The trainees were shaken, exhausted but alive. Cade looked at Sarah, seeing the exhaustion, the tension, the faint tremor in her hands she rarely allowed anyone to notice. She turned to him, eyes dark but unwavering. "This was a test," she said quietly, "not just of skill but of trust, endurance, and survival, and we passed barely." Cade exhaled, the tension leaving his body in a rush. He realized he had witnessed something extraordinary, a living testament to survival, experience, and strength forged under fire. But Sarah's eyes, scanning the perimeter one last time, held a flicker of unease. Cade followed her gaze, understanding instinctively that this battle, though over for now, was only the beginning. The storm of her past had arrived. They had survived, but Cade knew with a sinking certainty that the reckoning was far from finished. And somewhere beyond the tree line, shadows moved, waiting, calculating, and preparing for the next encounter, one that would push them all to the brink. Night had fully fallen over Fort Minden, shrouding the base in darkness thick with tension. Cade Mercer's muscles ached, his nerves were raw, and the memory of the day's relentless combat clung to him like smoke. He had survived the physical and mental challenges of training, endured Sarah Quinn's unyielding guidance, and witnessed firsthand the terrifying reach of her past. Yet nothing had prepared him for what the night promised, the final reckoning. Sarah moved through the yard like a shadow, silent and deliberate. Cade followed, trying to match her pace but aware of the truth he could no longer deny. He was only along for the ride, a witness to someone who had survived storms far beyond his comprehension. Her presence was commanding, her instincts razor-sharp. Every step, every glance, every decision was loaded with history, 12 years of combat, missions, and choices that had left ghosts in her wake. "They're coming for the base," she whispered to Cade, her voice low but unwavering. "And this time it's not a test. This is personal. They know who we are, what we can do. They'll strike with everything they've got." Cade swallowed hard. His heart pounded in his chest. He had thought last night's intrusion was the height of danger. He had thought the simulated attacks during the day were extreme. But the look in her eyes told him that those were merely preludes. The storm was now fully upon them. From the tree line, faint shadows emerged, more organized, more disciplined, and far more lethal than the attackers from last night. Cade realized instantly. These were not trainees, not instructors, not mercenaries. These were professionals trained to kill, and they had Sarah Quinn in their sights. "Positions," she commanded, her voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. "Barracks, defensive perimeter, cover fire. Everyone knows their role." The trainees scrambled, guided by her precision, by her experience, by the quiet authority that demanded obedience even in fear. Cade moved beside her, adrenaline surging, his mind racing to keep up with every command, every calculation, every tactical nuance. The first strike came silently. Figures moved through the shadows, attempting to breach the outer defenses. Sarah anticipated each move, intercepting threats before they became fatal. Cade watched, heart in his throat, as she neutralized attackers with surgical precision, disarming, incapacitating, controlling the chaos. But it wasn't enough. A sharp explosion ripped through the yard, sending debris into the night air. The trainees screamed and ducked for cover. Cade fell to his knees, disoriented, heart hammering. Sarah was already in motion, a blur of controlled fury. She assessed the damage, identified threats, and moved with a terrifying efficiency, pulling trainees to safety while simultaneously engaging attackers. One figure broke through near the communications tower. Cade froze. The attacker's movements were too familiar, too precise, too calculated. Then he saw her reaction. Sarah's eyes narrowed, and for a split second he saw something he had never seen before: fear. Not panic, not hesitation, but a flicker of recognition, a ghost from her past come to finish what had been started 12 years ago. "You," she whispered, voice low, deadly. The attacker smirked beneath his mask, moving with lethal intent. Cade could sense the tension radiating from Sarah. This wasn't just survival. This was vengeance, history, and justice colliding in the present. Cade instinctively raised his weapon, but Sarah grabbed his arm, shaking her head. "Not now. Watch, learn, then act." The two engaged in a deadly ballet. Sarah moved like water, fluid, adaptive, unpredictable. Each strike, each counter, each movement was honed by years of combat experience. The attacker was skilled, faster than anyone Cade had faced, but Sarah anticipated, redirected, and neutralized with precision that bordered on preternatural. Cade's eyes widened. He realized that what he had seen during training, during ambush simulations, during last night's intruder, those were mere shadows of her true capability. This was the culmination of 12 years of survival, strategy, and lethal skill. Finally, with a controlled strike, the attacker went down, incapacitated but alive. Sarah exhaled sharply, shoulders tense, but her gaze never left the perimeter. Cade approached cautiously. "You okay?" he asked, voice trembling. She nodded, voice low and steady. "For now, but this isn't over, it never is." Cade looked at her, a mix of awe and fear coursing through him. You survived this." "I've survived worse," she said quietly. "But surviving doesn't mean you're unscarred. It means you've learned how to carry the weight and still move forward." The rest of the night passed in tense vigilance. Every sound, every shadow, every movement was a potential threat. Cade observed Sarah, nodding, the exhaustion etched into her features, the faint tremor in her hands, the way she never allowed fear to dominate her actions. She was a force of nature, shaped by war, haunted by the past, yet utterly focused on the survival of those around her. By dawn, the base was quiet again. The attackers had retreated, leaving the yard littered with evidence of the conflict: broken fences, scorched earth, and the lingering scent of gunpowder. The trainees, shaken but alive, began to regroup. Cade stood beside Sarah, watching her move through the aftermath with methodical care, ensuring everyone was accounted for, injuries tended, and defensive positions reinforced. Cade finally spoke, voice low. "You did it. You protected everyone." Sarah paused, glancing at him. For a moment the mask of invincibility slipped. He saw exhaustion, grief, and a hint of guilt in her eyes. "I did what I had to do," she said quietly. "But surviving isn't about victory. It's about continuing, even when the ghosts of your past are still chasing you." Cade nodded slowly, understanding more than words could express. He had seen her strength, her precision, her leadership, but he had also glimpsed her humanity, her vulnerability, and the heavy burden of 12 years of combat. "You're incredible," he admitted, voice shaking. "But I don't think anyone could really understand what you've carried." She smiled faintly, a hint of warmth in the darkness. "Few do, and those who do rarely survive unchanged. But you're learning, Cade, that's what matters." As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the base, Cade realized the truth. Sarah Quinn wasn't just a soldier, a survivor, or a commander. She was a legacy, a living testament to the endurance of the human spirit, forged in fire, tempered by experience, and shaped by the weight of impossible choices. He also realized that his own life had changed irreversibly. Training with her, surviving beside her, witnessing her past collide with the present, it had altered him. He had seen courage in its rawest form, leadership in its purest, and sacrifice in its most personal, intimate detail. Sarah looked at him, her eyes scanning the horizon once more. "The storm may have passed for now," she said softly, "but it's never truly over. You carry your past, Cade, I carry mine, and sometimes it comes back. That's life." Cade nodded, understanding for the first time what it meant to survive beside someone like her. It wasn't just about physical skill. It wasn't just about strategy or endurance. It was about trust, resilience, and the willingness to face history, both personal and shared, with unwavering resolve. As the base settled into a fragile calm, Cade realized something profound. He had not only survived the storm of Sarah's past but had become part of her present. He had witnessed the reckoning, the trials, and the humanity behind the legend. And he knew that, whatever came next, he would face it differently, with courage, awareness, and the understanding that some stories are larger than life, yet deeply human at their core. Sarah Quinn, standing amidst the wreckage and survivors, turned to Cade one final time, her expression unreadable but resolute. "The world doesn't stop testing you," she said. "But surviving isn't just about strength. It's about knowing who you are and who you'll protect." Cade met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words sink in. And in that moment he understood. She was more than a soldier, more than a survivor, more than a legend. She was a force that shaped everyone she encountered, and her legacy was just beginning. The sun broke fully over Fort Minden, illuminating the yard in golden light. Shadows receded, but the memory of the night remained etched into the ground, into the people, and into Cade himself. The storm had come, the storm had passed, and the survivors, both seasoned and new, would carry the lessons, scars, and courage forward, forever marked by the woman who had led them through fire, darkness, and history itself.